Hello, everybody. Welcome, people. Bonjour, people. Welcome to the Globalization Speedrun Part 2 with me. So watching my first video again, I realized I was going way too slowly. So, hence, this is going to be a slightly quicker video, maybe. But yeah, let's get right into it. So, I mentioned using Anki last video, and some people asked questions about it, and I've actually shared my Anki flashcards on Globalization on this link here, which I'll put in the description. Yeah, so for speedruns I've been doing so far have been purely based on these notes, but I've compiled over the last 2 years. And yeah, it's really a product of my hard work. So I will show you how to use it now. Alright, so once you've downloaded Anki and my deck on Anki, which should be something about globalization, geography, blah blah blah, press into it and press study now. And then what are the causes of rural urban growth? It'll probably be like, I don't know, technology or something, shrinking world technology. Press show answer and it will show you the answers. And then you press what difficulty you think it is. So if you think it's really hard, you press again. Hard, you get it again in 6.1 months. So bear in mind, guys, these timings are based on me doing it over the last 2 years. So the more you do it, the longer the spaced repetition increases. So yeah, we talk about, if you probably watch like 100 study tubers, they talk about spaced repetition and blah blah blah. This is literally just doing that for you. And yeah, let's go through another one. So if I press again on this one, you see the red thing here. That means I'll do the flashcard again eventually. And then I go to the next one. What are the three global organizations responsible for economic globalization? Show answer. Oh, this is really easy. So I press easy and I get this card again in 2.1 years. And it's just a good way of spamming content. And yeah, that is essentially what Anki is. So check it out, download it, and hope you enjoy it. Alright, moving on. Let's get right into the bulk of the video. So 3.5, the scale and pace of economic migration has increased and the world has become more interconnected, creating consequences for people and environment. So what you need to know, how cities grow and its challenges, case studies of migrations, and the pros and cons of migration. So let's get into 3.5a then. So rural urban migration push and pull factors is responsible for growth of megacities. You need to know Mumbai or Karachi. So this is what you need to know, guys. So urban areas grow. Generally, this is a very general overview of urban areas. So natural increase is responsible for 60% of a city's growth. So this means people making babies. I'm sure you guys had PSEG lessons on this. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But yeah, when people make babies, there's going to be more people in the city. So that's essentially it. Migration, including internal rural to urban migration. So this literally could mean people flying in and out or moving from a different city. And reclassification of rural areas is 10%. So you talk about, like, if you live in London, people in Slough claiming to be in London, and they have that audacity because what's it called? The urban area is slightly growing outwards. So it's called rural urban growth, I believe, or urban growth, I forgot. And yeah, so rural places can get reclassified to become part of a city, but I still don't think Slough's part of London, so unlucky for you guys. And yeah, the percentages are purely general and non-specific. So let's talk about what push and pull factors of rural and urban areas are. So for urban areas, the pull factors. So let me just explain what push and pull are. So when you push something, you're putting it further away from you. When you pull something, you're attracting. So these are like the pros and cons, I guess, or the attractions and the benefits and costs of urban areas, blah, blah, blah. So urban pull factors, employment. So FDI from TNCs provide range of work opportunities. So you look at Canary Wharf and London. And another big one is schooling and healthcare may be of a higher quality due to increased funding and increased taxation. So tax income. And the rural push factors would be land reforms. So perhaps the government are using rural land for wind farms or something, for example. And this causes subsistence farmers to lose their land. So subsistence farmers are people who literally just farm for just the bare own need. They don't sell their crops. They only farm to survive for their own good. And agricultural modernization, which is becoming increasingly prevalent in our world. So yeah, people are using a lot more high tech for agriculture. So examples are AgroWatcher and CropX are examples of agricultural tech companies, and this reduces the need for rural labor. And another one would be just the lack of jobs. So again, there's not a case study for these, but you just need to know the idea of push and pull. If you just say push and pull it's a keyword basically. So if you put in your essay, it'll be good. And these are just general factors of why um, urban areas are more attractive sometimes. And another thing is you need to know the case study. So what is this? Case study, so the effects of mass rural to urban migration on Mumbai. So Mumbai is in India, if you didn't know. And here's some key facts about it. So main migration routes occur from Uttar Pradesh. Apologies for the terrible pronunciation to the Indian folk out there watching this video. And Bihar to Mumbai. So Bihar is my favorite place in India because it holds it holds a dear place in my heart because it was one of my first case studies because I love geography so much. And the second point, so you just need to remember the main migration routes that occur from Mumbai, and then you need to understand that because of the large service economy and a port uh, of and Mumbai being a port city, it provides a wide range of jobs, including entertainment, such as Bollywood, and Bollywood is the largest filmmaker, and this attracts migrants to work. However, because of the mass migration, there's a massive pressure on housing. So 55% of the population actually live in slums. So that's a very bad statistic. Yeah, I'd just say it's a social challenge. That is one of the effects. And here's another key fact. So between 1999 and 2016, there was a 105% rise in the waste generated by Mumbai. And this has led to Mumbai being the largest waste generator in the country. So this is an environmental challenge as this will lead to poorer sanitation and health. All right, so let's move on. So the effects of mass rural to urban migration on Karachi. So Karachi is a city in Pakistan, and yeah, you need to understand that there's also, like Mumbai, there's a high internal migration. So a lot of rural to urban migration is occurring from Sindh, Punjab province to Karachi. Yeah, apologies again to the Pakistani guys out there. I'm probably just butchered all those names right there. But again, Karachi is a port city and it's a financial hub that attracts rural people to work. There's a high number of jobs in the primary, secondary, and tertiary industries. And a key fact you need to know about is Karachi's population grew by 59.8% since the 1998 census to 14.9 million. And what this has meant for Karachi is that it's caused a lot of overcrowding. So in the 2017 census, there were 43,000, and you can read those numbers out, residents per square kilometer. So that is quite packed, 43,000 people per square kilometer. And yeah, I don't really have much more to say about this, but here, this is what I'm talking about to you guys. You can waffle about anything. Because of the overcrowding, you can waffle about more car usage and more congestion, which leads to like more CO2 and NO2, and what's called just fumes being excreted into the atmosphere, causing an environmental impact and poorer health. So it's that simple, guys. Okay, so moving on, we have 3.5b. So international migration has increased in global hub cities and regions, deepening interdependence, and blah blah blah. Case study, case study, case study. Okay. So what you need to know is how migration creates relationships between regions, and that's the idea of interdependence. And our some key case studies are Eastern Europe to the UK case study, and India to UAE. So yeah, let's go right into it. So how has international migration increased interdependence between regions? So host nations, which are the nations that take the migrants in, rely on source regions of migrants for workers to fill in unattractive job sectors. So this is very simply put. Obviously, there's high skilled migrants, but in most of these case studies, we're going to be talking about unattractive sectors such as construction and yeah, a lot of service industries, leisure. A lot of people don't want to do those jobs, and sometimes governments fill in these sectors with migrants. And the source region, in turn, relies workers rely on the host region to pay them back so they can send remittances back to home. So remittances are just it's just money sent abroad. So you probably if you have relatives abroad and they send you a bit of money, that's a remittance. So yeah, let's move on. So the case study you need to understand of interdependence is the UK and Eastern Europe. So the UK relies on Eastern European labour, and Eastern European migrants rely on the UK for migrant remittances. And yeah, so when I mean labour, I mean it's mainly construction for construction and just like handyman jobs such as being plumbers and mainly construction, but like house building and bricklaying and stuff like that. And a case study you could use is that in 2009, in the financial crisis, many building projects in the UK were cancelled and migrants stopped sending money back. And as a result, Estonia, which is in Eastern Europe, Estonia's economy shrank by 13%. So you can really see how you need that money and how a lot of migrants can actually carry an economy. So you can say this interdependence is very economic based. And yeah, it shows how the UK need labour and how labourers need the money to keep economies running. And another similar case study would be Indian migrants who go to UAE. So currently, there's like 2 million Indian migrants that live in UAE in like Abu Dhabi or Dubai. And as of 2022, actually no, in 2022, sorry, $16.2 billion have been sent back as remittances from the UAE, and this accounted for 18% of remittances sent in 2022. So you can see again how 16.2 billion is a lot of money. It doesn't come from nowhere, and it shows really the scale of the interdependence. And um, what UAE gains from this is they gain migrant workers who work in like transport, manufacturing, and construction. And as you can see, 1/5 are professionals working in the service industry. So perhaps migrants here are generally in lower skilled jobs, and it just shows the interdependence for labor and money. All right, so 3.5C, here we go. So migration has economic, social, political, environmental costs and benefits for both host and source nations. So you just need to know the pros and cons of migration for source and host nations. So again, host nations are nations receiving, source nations are the nations sending the migrants. So let's take a look here, pros and cons for migration for source nations. So decreased unemployment as people move out. So yeah, imagine you live in a very rural area and the source nation, and you move out. That frees up one more job for another person who perhaps does not is not as qualified, and the source nation gains remittances sent home. So as again, I showed you the what's it called Indian sending uh, money back from UAE, and a case study you could use is that overseas Filipino women sent 12 billion back in remittances in 2006 alone. And a con for the source nation would be that they suffer from brain drain. Because imagine you're in a source nation, but you're like the only IT guy there, and you leave. Then you just really reduce the opportunity for the source nation to develop or your region to develop a high skilled economy. And a lot of these workers, such as doctors and business workers, can actually decrease life quality and switch off a place in globalization. And another big thing would be the source would suffer from an imbalanced population, as usually the younger people are actually leaving, make up the bulk of migrants, and they leave the dependent population behind, such as the elderly. So pros and cons for host nations. So migrants obviously take less appealing jobs to fill skill shortages in the host nations, and migration is not always low skilled. I think we need to get that out of people's heads. Yeah, we can have you can have highly skilled migrants, and a good case study would be the UK, which is the HSMP program, so the highly skilled migrants program, where they make it easier for people with like degrees to migrate to the UK. I don't know why you would come to UK. I'm trying to move out, but you know, it's just stuff like this, and you can sustain a leisure sector with like people filling in jobs in hotels, bars, and also migrants can help balance an aging population. As I said before, when usually in source nations or in rural regions, there's a lot of old people, and when loads of young people move towards an area, you actually just rebalance the population structure pyramid. And the cons would be more migrants can actually increase pressure on like social care, housing, and this could inflate house prices, strain the healthcare system, and be more costly if more people are claiming benefits. All right, so 3.6, let's get onto it. So, the emergence of a global culture based on Western ideas and consumptions and attitudes towards the physical environment is one outcome of globalization. Man, like every time I read these, they just overcomplicate everything to the point like it starts to annoy me, when I'm reading back. So I just put it simply for you guys. You just need to know how Western culture is dominating and has created a global culture where ideas have merged. And you just need to understand it's like perhaps some people see it as a positive and some people see it as a negative. Yeah, so moving on, let's go on 3.6a. So cultural diffusion occurs as a result of globalization. Oh my, this is so long. Yeah, this is actually when I read it back again, it starts to annoy me again. It's very simple. You just need to know the idea of westernization and how TNCs have spread it and how this has led to cultural erosion. So the main case studies you need to know for 3.6a are diets in Asia and how they've changed. And you need to understand the case study of how global culture has helped disadvantaged groups gain awareness. So a key case study of how TNCs have caused westernization would be Disney. I mean, everyone knows Disney, all the princess movies, all the blah blah. And yes, what you need to know about it is among the largest media companies, builds brand globally by redubbing films and animations, and it promotes American values such as consumerism. And a big thing you need to understand is the idea of a white wedding is really being pushed by Disney, which is a Western cultural tradition, and most weddings now follow this culture despite cultures having their own traditions. So if you actually think about it, when you think of a wedding, everyone just associates it with a white dress, and most of the time, this is very generalizing. But like when you watch people's dream weddings, they're always just white dress in a church, everyone walking down the alley, flowers. But yeah, there's like that's just a very westernized point of view. There's a lot more cultures that use different traditions, but somehow the white wedding has been dominating. So another case study needs to understand how westernization has changed diets in Asia, and this has actually caused a few problems. And you see here how, let's read back 3.6a. It talks about how an increasingly westernized global culture impacts the environment and people. So this is basically, yeah, we're going to talk about how westernization has caused Asia to change environmentally and socially, I guess. So traditionally, Asian diets have been low in meats but loads of vegetables, and due to globalization, this is giving way to more meat and fast food amongst the middle class. And a key thing or fact you need to know is that China's meat consumption increased from 5 to 50 kilograms per capita between 1990 to 2015. So people are eating 45 kilograms more meat per year, which is quite crazy. If you think about it, or it's very crazy actually. Now China is now the largest market for processed food, which has shifted Asian agriculture to livestock farming, increasing methane emissions. So what this means is that whilst Asia's becoming more westernized in a sense, people are eating more meat, and this has actually led to like the loss of the way of life in a sense that the traditional diets, which have been high in vegetables and low in meat, and it's also shifted the economy, not economies, but the agricultural landscape to livestock farming, which has actually led to environmental implications. So, increased methane emissions. If you know about methane, methane is a greenhouse gas, and it's very strong. What's it called? Keeping heat in. So yeah, it's responsible for climate change in a sense and global warming. And another thing would be the rising affluence due to globalization puts pressure on specific animals. So westernization and just the idea of integrating what's called economies has increased incomes for people. So the famous shark fin soup in China has actually increased in popularity. and has caused the endangerment of sharks, which is another environmental environmental problem. Yep. So let's move on to the next case study. So how has a global culture, an emergence of a global culture, been successful for like disadvantaged groups? And this is the Paralympics case study. So generally, the cultural attitudes towards disability and disabled people are changing. And an example of this would be global media has promoted Paralympics into a massive event. And in 2016, 159 nations took part in the Rio Paralympics, which is the most. And according to the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee, the Rio 2016 Games were the most viewed in history, attracting a cumulative audience of 4.1 billion. This is for the Paralympics alone. So it really shows how global culture can also be positive and for disadvantaged groups. And that is basically it. And let's move on to 3.6b then. So in some locations, cultural erosion, loss of language, traditional food and music, and has resulted in changes to the built and natural environment. So again, this is very long, but you just need to understand the cultural erosion has changed certain areas culturally and physically. And a good case study for this would be cultural change in Amazonia, which is Brazil, and just generally about region. So members of tribes are being more exposed to Western culture. So Amazonians are beginning to wear t-shirts in favor of traditional clothing. And the bigger thing that you need to talk about is that tribal members are leaving to nearby urban regions like Manaus. And this is driven by globalization and cultural globalization, as products like soaps and Brazilian nuts are being increasingly exported to Western countries, and so demand for work and earning opportunities increase. So, in the face of money, a lot of people actually just ditch their way of life and their culture, which it's up to you to believe if that's good or bad, but it's an example of cultural erosion. All right, so moving on. So whilst the cultural change in the Amazonia region, we're going to talk about the cultural erosion and changes to the environment in the Amazon. So, whilst indigenous people regard the Amazon as sacred, Westernization has actually spread ideas such as capitalism, and the rainforest is now seen more as an economic resource to exploit for the Brazilian people. And since the 1970s, 20% of the Amazon rainforest has been cleared, and 5,183 kilometers squared of Amazon was cleared in 2023 alone. And it just shows how cultural erosion and westernization has led to less regard for the environment. And that's just a small example. All right, so let's move on to 3.7. So, globalization has led to dramatic increases in development for some countries, but also a widening development gap, extremities, and disparities in environmental quality. So, there's nothing like case study heavy thing you need to know here. You just need to know a few ways to measure different types of development, the idea of Gini coefficient, trends of development since the 70s. Yeah, so not many case studies for this section. It's more just like knowledge. So let's move on to 3.7a. So economic measures of development, contrast with those focused on social development and environmental quality. So you need to understand the different development indicators, social and economic and environmental. I'll run through some indicators with you, the idea of Gini coefficient, single versus composite indices, the advantages and disadvantages, and how economic things, what's called measures, differ from social and environmental indicators. So first of all, we'll talk about single versus composite indices. So composite indices like HDI use a range of factors and combine variables into one single measure. So you can argue it's more of a holistic approach, whereas single indicators use one variable, so like money earned. And composite indices can give more accurate overview of development as opposed to single indicators. And you can argue here that like economic indicators are usually very black and white. They don't really show much. They only show you the money generated, and it's not a holistic overview of development. And it doesn't outline stuff like wealth inequality and stuff like that. So, for example, countries with high GDPs, like let's say America, the US, they will have a large wealth disparity, which could suggest that perhaps the development there is not great, and it's really masked by just the high GDP of US. Whereas HDI takes into account like literacy rates and life expectancy, which perhaps you can argue is more accurate. So first, that the main difference between economic and environmental and social. So economic is more black and white, and it's not holistic, and social indicators are more holistic, which you can argue about. And here's some economic development indicator examples. So we have GNP, gross national product, measures output produced by countries' factories of production wherever located. GDP, gross domestic product, measures the total output of goods and services produced in a country over a year. GDP per capita is calculated by dividing GDP by total population. So again, here, as you can see, guys, the main point to get away is that GDP, stuff like GDP, GNP, or economic development indicators often only take into account one thing, and that is the money earned. And yeah, whilst it's a good economic indicator, it's not a good holistic development indicator. So that's all you can argue about. And social development indicators examples, so the classic Human Development Index, HDI, combines life expectancy, income, and years in education. So think about it, it combines economic development and social development, which is a way more holistic and a lot better, you can argue to be. And it's expressed on a scale between 0 and 1, 1 being the highest. And there's also a gender inequality index, so combines stuff like reproductive health for women, participation in the workforce, and empowerment to measure gender-based development. So again, guys, notice the difference between economic indicators, whereby it uses one factor, where social development uses multiple factors. And yeah, so you just need to just remember some of these. So GI, gender equality index, is measured between 0 to 1. It's 0 being no equality, 1 being most unequal. And empowerment measured by political representation in parliament. So that is essentially it. And again, can't stress enough how economic indicators perhaps might not be the most holistic indicators to development. So let's move on. So again, here's the social versus economic indicators. Economic indicators are often single indicators, whereas social indicators are more composite. They're often more composite, and this shows that social indicators may be more representative of development, and they're more holistic. That's a very good phrase you can use in exams. And yeah, social indicators often involve economic factors in their way of measuring development. So you can argue social indicators might be better. And just a small thing you need to know: environmental development indicators. So the World Health Organization has air pollution levels measured. So they measure like sulfur dioxide, nitrate dioxide, no nitrate oxide, nitrate oxide. Yeah, sorry guys, I didn't take chemistry. I dropped it at GCSE, or finished doing it at GCSE, so I'm not particularly sure what NOx is. But yeah, so particulates and volatile organic compounds, so VOCs, are so they measure stuff like that, and yeah, they measure these pollution levels or particles linked to respiratory diseases like lung cancer and asthma. And yeah, as it says here, you can research more yourself on this, but it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't really see a question being on environmental development indicators. They usually focus on social and economic, but just in case, research it. All right, so let's go on 3. Are we on 7 now? 3.7, yes. Wow, okay. Storming through this. 3.7b, trends in widening income inequality globally and nationally, measured by Gini, suggests globalization has created winners and losers for people and physical environment. So yeah, so you just need to understand how globalization has created inequalities, and the Gini coefficient is a way of measuring these inequalities. So the Gini coefficient, number between 0 and 1, that represents income inequality. So 0 means a number 0 for Gini coefficient means that there's a complete equal wealth distribution in the population, and 1 is that one person owns all the wealth. And if a question asks you, or 12 marker asks you about development inequalities, this is a good model to drop. You can just say like, this suggests that the Gini coefficient would be blah blah, very high or very low, depending on what you want to argue. And just linking it back to this part, 3.7b is it? Yeah, 3.7b. You just need to understand that there's a varying success for people. So development is not always evenly distributed. A lot of the times, corruption or perhaps just the way the world is set up and the economy is set up, it means that Economically, the winners at the top earn a lot, but the people at the bottom or earn less. Or yeah, just they just earn less. So you just need to understand there's always inequality. Development has never been perfectly equal. And yeah, we'll move on to 3.7c. Contrasting trends in economic development and environmental management between global regions since 1970 indicate differential progress that can be related to outcomes of globalization. So again, there's no case studies for this part, but you just need to understand that globalization has had varying economic and environmental and social success. But there's no case study for this again, but you just recognize that there's winners and losers of globalization. So what this is really trying to show you is that globalization is not just positive, it's quite negative, it could be, and there's just a mix of both things. And the idea of contrasting trends in development and environmental management can be seen through the Kuznets curve, which is a prime example of varying economic growth and environmental success. So, just to quickly run through it, the idea is that as countries develop more economically, they'll go through phases of caring for the environment more. And if you can see here, um, here we have the turning point and environmental worsens, environmental improves. So it's just the idea that as countries rapidly develop, if you follow my line, so like for example, BRIC nations, their income will rapidly increase, but their environmental degradation will rapidly increase as well, causing the environment to worsen. But then eventually, as the economic growth continues to grow, the care for environment increases, and they will invest more into like recycling schemes, environmental policies to reduce the environmental damage that they've already done, causing the environment to improve. So prime example for this would be China's economic boom in the 70s. You can clearly argue that the economic growth skyrocketed, but then they're still on the side of the environment worsening. So you just understand like yeah, different phases of environmental care is attributed to economic growth as well, and it's a model you can always link back to. So let's move on to 3.8. Yep, so here we have 3.8. Social, political, and environmental tensions have resulted from the rapidity of global change caused by globalization. So, as I said before, globalization is oftentimes in textbooks portrayed as a positive thing, but you need to understand that not all stakeholders are fond of globalization. So, the things you need to know are globalization has led to tensions between people, people are trying to limit globalization, and cultural groups are trying to retain their culture. So let's look at 3.8a. So open borders, deregulation, and encouragement of FDI has created culturally mixed societies and thriving migrant diasporas, but tensions have resulted elsewhere. So the things you need to know are case studies on the Mekong River and how water conflicts, and a case study on Golden Dawn in Greece, which is an example of extremism, and just at the point at the start about like has created culturally mixed societies and thriving migrant dis- diaspora, sorry. So you just need to understand that globalization has also created successful migrant groups. So you can argue that 11% of the UK population in 2015 were immigrants. And an example of good success would be the Chinese ethnic descent, where in 2023 they had the highest attainment 8 scores in GCSE. So whilst on one hand, yeah, some people dislike it, but there are thriving groups or communities of immigrants that are starting to establish themselves. An example of this would be the Chinese people within the UK who scored highest at GCSEs in 2023. All right, so let's look at the rise of extremism due to globalization. This example of a stakeholder um, opposing what's called globalization, and yeah, so Golden Dawn is a far right neo Nazi group based in Greece, and they oppose international migration and are protectionists. So, protectionists are people that want to protect their own culture and they want to limit the amount of people coming in through their borders. And in 2014, the influx of Syrian migrants to Europe actually created tensions between Greece and other migrants and countries. So this shows that the movement of people due to globalization is not always regarded in a positive light, and some groups see the formation of global culture as a loss of one's own traditions. So yeah, that is essentially the idea of extremism. So not everyone is fond of globalization. And let's move on to the globalization and water conflicts. So the case study for this one would be the Mekong River. So the river runs through China, Myanmar, Laos, I should say, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, which means that there are many developments, such as dams, will affect flows elsewhere. And you need to understand that increasing foreign direct investment due to globalization within these countries has meant that development has been encouraged on the river. So, and this has led to just like conflicts between people. And I will run through how tensions have been created in each country. So let's go through China and how they've created tensions along the Mekong River. So China, first of all, is not a part of the Mekong Agreement, which is agreement between the countries along the river, and they obviously try to promote sustainable working together and partnership. But since they're not part of this agreement, this will obviously lead to political tensions, as this shows that China is not willing to cooperate. And another big thing to note is that the southern part of the river running through China is actually one of the poorest regions in China. So China have a massive incentive for damming the river in the southern region for hydroelectric power to encourage economic development. So it really shows that China have little incentive to stop, and then they probably will have no intention of stopping dams. Sorry. And then let's talk about tensions along the Mekong caused by Myanmar. So they're actually least affected by dam proposals, and they contain several tributaries of the Mekong, but people building dams won't really affect the flows through Myanmar. However, if Myanmar were to dam the tributaries, which are just like little rivers, not rivers, but tributaries are just other section parts, little like rivers that sprout up from the main river. And if they dam these tributaries, they will increase downstream flow. But Myanmar is not part of the Mekong Agreement as well, so there is an element of political tension here as well. So yeah, it really comes down to reducing flows. So Myanmar's reducing flows actively, and they're not part of the political agreement. Now let's talk about Vietnam. So they contain the Mekong Delta, which is 50,000 kilometers squared of fertile area, which supports 40% of Vietnam's population, as they help grow rice. So the floodings help grow rice. But since China has dammed the river upstream, 10% has 10% of flow has already been lost, reducing the yield of rice, leading to tensions. So look here how because China aren't part of the Mekong Agreement, and the fact that they've been damming the river is causing lower flows downstream, causing less rice to be grown, which for subsistence farmers is their way of life and is their main source of nutrient or food, which perhaps cause social tension as well, because you can argue you're destroying people's livelihoods. And also, since Vietnam are a major rice distributor, you're also messing up their economy a bit. So you're also causing economic tensions between people. So yeah, that's just Vietnam is really a big stakeholder that is being affected negatively by these tensions. So for Cambodia, I don't really have hard PSD for this, but they they have high intention for HEP. They need it quite a bit since it will boost economic development, having an energy source in more rural areas. But this will displace villages from fertile land. And since Cambodia hasn't got the highest GDP, displacing people from rural areas where they farm usually, it won't sit well since the people will be displaced and they will have they're not very high skilled. So going into urban areas isn't really an option. And now let's talk about Laos. So 90% of the population depend on the Mekong River for agriculture, and obviously dams upstream will reduce the flow to Laos, and this will cause tensions as people will lose their way of life, as the agricultural yield will decrease, so it will threaten the livelihoods and will also threaten the economic livelihoods as well. So you got to think about both sides. And finally, Thailand. So 36% of the population lie within the Mekong Basin. So obviously a lot of people rely on it again. So damming upstream will actually again reduce flows and reduce the livelihoods of people within the basin, since 36% of the people in Thailand are here, and it will just threaten the economic livelihoods and the social livelihoods and their abilities to just survive from day to day. Now, let's talk about the attempts. So 3.8b, attempts have been made in some locations to control the spread of globalization by censorship, limiting immigration, and trade protectionism. So you just need to understand how places control globalization through censorship, immigration limitation, and trade protectionism. So let's talk about censorship first and how this controls globalization. So the internet is banned in North Korea because Kim Jong Un does not want his people to have access to Western ideas. That's an example. He doesn't want the Western ideology to spread. And also in China, the internet is very widely used by 52% of the population in 2016, but it is censored. So some searches for politically sensitive topics like Tiananmen Square protests get no results because the CCP seek to prevent unhelpful discussion. So this is just an example of censorship and what governments can do to limit the spread of globalization. And controlling globalization through controlling immigration, sorry. So what countries can do, they can, like Australia, they use a point-based system for immigration to match immigrants to actual economic needs and job vacancies. So points are based on education and skills to ensure migrants match a country's needs. So this obviously makes it a lot harder for low-skilled migrants to make it through borders and border patrol. And yeah, it's just a way of ensuring this point-based system. Like I said, you limit the amount of people coming in. So obviously, if you need point system, if there's a point system, it makes it much harder for you to get citizenship. And the UK also tries to do this, but its EU membership limited its effectiveness as the EU allowed free movement of people. And finally, limiting globalization through trade protectionism. So India, for example, will restrict foreign companies investing in its retail sector to protect Indian small shopkeepers from competition. And the European Union put tariffs on imports to increase prices of foreign produce. So a lot of countries will do this as well, but to ensure people would rather use the homegrown stuff to support local farmers, governments will make foreign produce a lot more expensive. So let's move on to 3.8. Yeah, so 3.8c, some groups seek to retain their cultural identity within countries. So the case study is First Nations people within Canada. And it's the idea that First Nations people's culture is being affected by globalization, which brings concerns. So let's see, tensions on globalization and case study on Canada's First Nation people. So oil companies have actually recently decided to switch on remote areas like the Salty region, and 200 million barrels have already been extracted since the 1920s. But indigenous people see this as a negative influence. So a lot of oil refineries are polluting lakes, and what this means is that there's less fish for the indigenous people, and fracking is causing water pollution. So notice how some the groups, the First Nations people, are being, how saying, essentially being exploited. The environments are being exploited, and it's affecting their way of life in a sense. And workers are bringing effects of drugs and alcohol to the younger Dean people. So, yeah, obviously the First Nation people, they're arguing against it, but this is what's happening there. So all companies are threatening their way of life. So, yeah. All right, so 3.9 is ethical, and so final part. Ethical environmental concerns about unsustainability have led to localism and awareness of the impacts of a consumer society. Sorry, you need to understand that the emergence of a global culture has led to unsustainable mass consumerism, and this has led to a rise in the ethical and environmental concerns, which has paved way for new strategies. So let's look at 3.9a. So local groups and engineers promote local sourcing, transition towns as one response to globalization by increasing sustainability. So you need to understand the idea of local sourcing with its benefits and costs. The transition town case study. And what a transition town is a settlement where individuals and businesses adopt bottom-up initiatives to make their community more sustainable and less reliant on global trade. So, local sourcing, pros and cons. It's easy to buy. You just read it here. So, pros are easier for buyers to travel to suppliers to discuss development and inspect, easier to satisfy local preferences for specialized products, shorter supply chains, so you can predict delivery times and have lower costs. And the cons are suppliers can be over dependent on one buyer as a stable income, and buyers have little room for negotiation as they have one source. And there's a lack of options for buying and selling, as for selling and buying for suppliers and buyers. And a case study for Transition Town is Todmorden, which is a town in West Yorkshire that aims to increase the amount of local food grown and eaten locally. So, an example of what they do is they transform public flower beds into community herb gardens and vegetable patches. So they're less reliant on international and from imports from across the world, and it reduces their carbon footprint. So that's essentially what 3.7 is. So this is just an example of what people can do with local sourcing and transition towns. And now let's look at 3.9b. So fair trade and ethical consumption schemes may reduce the environmental degradation, the inequalities of global trade, and improve working conditions for some people. So not the free ethical consumption schemes. So the ethical consumption schemes you need to know are fair trade and Agenda 21. So fair trade, what they are, they're a company or organization that ensures farmers of tea, coffee, etc., bananas, you'll see that little stick on all of them, are paid a guaranteed price. And this was created by Oxfam UK. And this is achieved by improving market access for poorer countries and ending overproduction. So in 2005, richer nations, so high income countries, spent $1 billion subsidizing agriculture. So what this does is actually encourages a surplus of crops on the world's market, which undermines small farmers. So what fair trade do is they attempt to end this, and they campaign to end this over subsidizing of agriculture, and they attempt to just help pay a fair price. But fair trade does add a little. Fair trade does add extra income, um, and it does rely on consumers like us picking the more expensive products. So for me personally, when I see a fair trade banana is like 90p more, as a person who's about to study at university, I need to save as much money as possible, so I'm not paying for the 90p. That is the mentality I sometimes have, and I'm very skeptical of this stuff. But you know, um, yeah, really, it should just goes to show how fair trade really relies on people like us to pay for it, which sometimes I don't want to. And Agenda 21 case study. It's an agreement at Earth Summit Rio. So it's an agreement made at the Earth Summit Rio in 1992. And under the agreement, world governments were to create plans for sustainable development. This is amazing and all, but this agreement is non-binding, so its effectiveness is highly debatable. So there's no like legal requirement to meet some certain benchmarks. So it really is just sort of for show, but you can argue that it creates awareness. And we move on to 3.9c, which is the very last part. So recycling has a role in managing resource consumption. So recycling helps in managing resource consumption. So recycling materials from waste products reduces extraction of new materials and decreases consumption of the amount sent to landfill. So in the UK, between 2003 and 13, recycling of waste increased from 17 to 44%, but this is still very much behind Germany's 65%. And you need to understand the idea, not the idea, the case study of Keep Britain Tidy. So Keep Britain Tidy is a NGO that try to, I guess, encourage recycling. So what Keep Britain Tidy is an NGO set up in 1954, and in 1969 they introduced the Tidy Man logo on bins and packaging to encourage people to dispose of their litter appropriately. And their campaigns encourage households to recycle and firms to reduce packaging under proportion that can be recycled. Oh, sorry. The campaigns encourage households to recycle and firms to reduce packaging or the proportion that can be recycled. So again, they're just an example of how recycling works and how NGOs can improve or reduce the damage caused by globalization. And yeah, this is the end of the PowerPoint. So yeah, that is the end of the speed run. What can I say? Today, the date is currently 26th of April, 2024. So exams are coming up, 2 weeks. I wish you the best of luck. Some exam tips: stay hydrated, keep moving, don't rot inside your house and revise all day. Try to change up where you revise. Don't revise in your room because revising in your room can actually impact your sleep. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about this. When I was this time last year, I was really annoyed. I just wanted to get exams over and done with. I know that feeling, so just the very best of luck. And if I do end up dropping a video within the next 2 weeks, you'll see this same message. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, hit me up on the email provided on the link in description. And yeah, email me. And I'll probably see you in the next video. If I don't see you in the next video, wish you the best of luck. This might be the last video you watch from me. But yeah, very best of luck. And I will see you in the next one, hopefully. I might be doing something different by the time you guys finish A levels.